Delhi, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. In this session, we'll focus on the intersection between land and energy. And of course, we know that land, as we've discussed in great detail, we know that land is essential for development, and energy is also essential for development. But where are the trade-offs? Where are the competing needs? So we'll discuss. This session will be what are the implications on land use from an energy perspective. We'll have 3 speakers, so I'll give a brief introduction first, and then we'll have 3 speakers. Dr. Ganesh Hegde is a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University. Sukanya Khar, soon to be doctor, from the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi. She's my PhD student. And Mr. Ganesh Bhatta, who has joined us all the way from Nepal. He's a joint secretary in the land ministry at Nepal. We're very happy to have you, sir. Let me just begin with a short presentation that I've prepared. Great. So, at IIT Delhi, we're working on the Net Zero India project, and the objective of this project is to identify and envision development compatible pathways for achieving net zero energy transition in India. And so a bit of a background. We know that India targets achieving net zero by 2070, but today what we see around us is that it's developmental goals that drive policy. And why is development so essential for India? I don't think we have to address that question, but just to give you some data and put things in perspective, we are the 3rd largest CO2 emitter in absolute terms, but in per capita terms, we're way down in the rankings. We're 132nd in per capita terms. This just shows the stark difference, or the stark challenge that we face in terms of both achieving net zero goals while also making sure that our population achieves the amount of development that we need in the future. And currently, 90% of our primary energy mix is still from coal and crude oil. So we have a long way to go. What do we want to achieve in terms of development? The word development has a lot of different meanings. It means different things to different people. Just some ways in which development could be characterized as this Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, which we have that's characterized by economy, infrastructure, system, demography, demand at the Government of India's campaign. Sustainable development goals are another way of thinking about development for India. And if you look at newspapers, if you look at the current affairs, you will see that inequality, employment, all of these are important issues. In terms of achieving sustainable development goals, if you see the figure on the right, you have, in terms of achieving almost 70% of the targets are either worsening or have only achieved limited progress in India. And about 30% of the targets we are on track. So in terms of development, we have a long way to go. Why do we need a new study from an energy perspective? We looked at 140 studies. I believe we've been very, very comprehensive. We looked at 140 modeling studies that assessed or evaluated net zero pathways for India. And we found that most of the studies do not engage with aspects of employment, equity, or spatial descriptions sufficiently. So, for example, out of the studies, we only found that maybe 12% of the studies focused on energy transitions even discussed employment. About 17% discussed health impacts. Very few, about 15% discussed land. And all of these studies are not necessarily at the national level. Some of these studies were focused on particular states or particular regions. So this is just to say that there's no study which provides like a combined and comprehensive analysis of, employment implications, land implications, and natural resource implications, water usage, what is the impact on biodiversity, across the full energy sector in a spatially resolved manner for India. There are studies which give you estimates for the amount of land use required, but they're not based on actual spatial resolution of the energy projections. And so that's what we want to achieve with our study. And so our overall objective is, the main question we ask is, how can policy levers enable synergies and avoid trade-offs between net zero emissions pathways on the one hand and developmental outcomes on the other? And so we do this by dividing it into 4 pieces of work. First, what are the mitigation pathways? Second, what are the implications of these mitigation pathways on developmental implications? So that's GDP growth, capital mobilization, equity, energy access, employment, health, that is mostly the evolution impact. I can't tell you how grateful I am to see a blue sky after months of being in grey skies in Delhi. So this is, these are important questions. So how we characterize development is through these indicators: GDP growth, capital mobilization, equity, employment, health, that is in terms of evolution, and biodiversity. We also want to address trade-offs with natural resource use and mitigation pathways. And finally, what policy levers can broaden the scope for mitigation, and which policy levers can lead to desirable lock-ins in the near future. Now, how land use will change, let's get into land in more detail. How land use will change in the future is highly uncertain. There was a McKinsey report which talked about the land requirements in 2070 versus India. So there are competing land requirements. They say that we need 25 million hectares more agricultural land for food production. We need 10 million hectares more for renewable power, and so on. And so the total incremental land requirement, they estimate, is at 45 million. Separately, the Forest Survey of India talks about how we may need about 7.4 million hectares to restore existing but degraded forest land and open forests. And another 11.3 million hectares of afforestation. Similarly, the ADB talks about how the share of land available for food will change over time. So the overall point is that there's a lot of uncertainty about how much land we need and how the for different competing uses, and how and what are the implications for the available land for us. And similarly, there's also a lot of uncertainty about the land required for renewable energy in particular. In one study talked about how, this slide lists a few studies. So some studies, one study in 2012 talks about needing 29,000 kilometers square. Another study talks about 8,000 kilometers square. And another recent study, I think, which was quoted also, in yesterday's keynote was talks about needing 1.2 to 1.6 lakh kilometers square. So fundamentally, there's just a lot of uncertainty about how much land we need in order to meet our net zero targets. And similarly, this is another study which identifies how much feasible area exists for wind and solar and so on. And so, in order to address this uncertainty, figure out why is there so much variation, how much land do we really have, what are the trade-offs between the land required for renewable energy and potentially for agriculture, for forests, for food, for tribal areas and so on. We are planning to we'll show you some of the work that Ganesh and Sukanya are doing to address our understanding of these trade-offs. This is just a description of the kind of modeling that we plan to do. On the left you see sort of where we're getting the data from, how we're conceptualizing our scenarios. We've conducted a lot of workshops, we're conducting also large-scale surveys. We start with energy system projections, then we make spatial descriptions of the energy system projections. The spatial descriptions of these energy system projections are informed by surveys, by interviews, by in-depth qualitative studies, and then we finally want to understand what the impact of, let's say, having X amount of gigawatts of solar in Jharkhand will mean for employment in Jharkhand. What would it mean for air pollution in Uttar Pradesh? What would it mean for biodiversity in another state in India? So that's the third part of the study will focus on the developmental implications. So with that, let me introduce Ganesh. He will give us, his work involves a lot of very, very detailed analysis of spatial data. So spatial analysis of candidate project areas across socio-economic data, across cropping patterns, across income patterns, land governance aspects, and so on. And we'll also hear from Sukanya, who has done in-depth case studies in Rajasthan and Karnataka to identify impacts of solar park development, impacts of different types of land tenure on local communities. So with that, over to Ganesh.
Thank you. Just a full disclaimer, I think this is an ongoing study, and we have collected a huge number of maps and data sets to understand, can we cite or can we sort of understand what is the siting and where are these candidate project areas for developing renewable and other energy infrastructure in India. And my presentation sort of gives a bird's eye view, and these birds are really far away in the sky. But I think Sukanya is going to give a little bit more on reality and how things can go wrong or go well for citing renewables and other energy. So I showed this slide yesterday also, and just going to repeat it. We need to build a lot of solar and a lot of renewable to achieve net zero transition, and that's kind of any scenario, any kind of bandwidth of scenarios that you look at. Every scenario tells us India is going to rely, and as a matter of fact, world is going to rely a lot on solar, and the scale of building this renewable is very crucial. It's as much as adding a 100 megawatt plant every day for India, but unfortunately we don't have a coherent policy that talks both or covers both land use and energy infrastructure. We have a impressive policy on building renewable or building energy infrastructure, and we have good policies on land reforms and land governance, but there is no policy even at the state level which kind of ties these two sectors together, and hence there is expected to be a lot of conflicts, and we do already have a lot of conflicts in land areas, right? So most of our land-related conflicts come from common land, almost half of them, and then there are some from common and private land in India. And it is not a new thing for India. There are countries which have gone through this and still going through. Developing countries are no different. Developed countries have went through this for every project, and social licensing, community licensing is a huge issue even there. But what we are trying to do is not just find candidate project areas, but also try and anticipate some of these resistance for building an infrastructure, and also hopefully some good practices and opportunities to avoid a lot of conflicts with biodiversity and communities while building large-scale renewable projects. So what we try to do, this is sort of a two-step process. What we try to do is first do a typical good old cost optimization process where we have certain supply side technologies and we estimate the demand, and then we are coming up with this pathways to supply least cost energy to every demand sector. But that's not good enough because of most of the social, political and cultural aspects are not considered. So what we're trying to do in this particular project is to include a lot of socio-cultural and political aspects in both in defining our supply side and also in optimizing for these cost technologies. So the idea is to bring in a lot of equity principles so that development and equitable development goes hand in hand with mitigation. So this is a high resolution land use map, and as you can see, this is like a 10-meter resolution land use map. As you can see, most of India has a lot of cropland, and then there are Western Ghats and northeast part of India and some Himalayan India, which has very undulated and high elevation land, and also a lot of forest and which are great carbon sink as well. But our focus of interest here is on bare ground, which ideally has a very few vegetation and low lying vegetation, and then rangeland, which is essentially open ground and open for development, which is also categorized in, I think Survey of India categorized both of these categories as wasteland. So if you see, most of it is sort of available in Rajasthan, Jammu Kashmir, and some part of Gujarat. But the issue in Jammu Kashmir and Gujarat is it's also high elevation and not a flat land. And then we also use transport and existing infrastructure, because some of this have to be buffered. We can't develop a lot of solar plants or wind plants around national highways in the buffer zone. And then there are waterways and canals, which are very important for agriculture needs. So those areas are excluded from our analysis or the land availability. And then the other important aspect is in biodiversity areas and all the national parks and reserves. So we also exclude them from any future development or for RE projects. So this includes tiger reserves, elephant corridors, biosphere reserves, and also a lot of UNESCO and other heritage sites, and mangrove and coastal and non-coastal ecosystems. And then any area that is restricted from government, like defense areas, for example, and airports and runways and areas that are sort of no-go zones or no construction zones, those are also restricted from our analysis, in the sense they're filtered out from becoming a candidate project area. This also includes a lot of mining areas and the buffer around identified mining resources. And then we developed a few data sets, and one of them or two of them are transmission data set. So we used existing transmission infrastructure from Government of India to digitize them and to develop the existing infrastructure, which will help us, expand where new substations and new transmission capacity has to come. We also got from OpenStreetMap and other sources some of the substations which are capable of evacuating power, which is, I think, very critical for developing it. So here is a long list of all the layers that we use and where do we got these layers from and what is the data source and what kind of processing that we have done. Sorry for the small font, it's kind of a long list. But what is missing is also here we have we don't have good data sources on land ownership, and I learned from a few speakers today that a lot of them are developing it and it will be useful. And other informations such as the livestock dependence on grassland and community dependence on things like sacred groves or ornas, those are also very important, and those data sets are also not available. We are making some progress by talking to experts and talking to people who have developed this data source so that we can include them in our analysis. And then other crucial thing or crucial aspect of all of this is sort of population density and demand for housing, for example. So we have included population density in our analysis. The demand for housing is again largely depend on state policies and government policies where they want to develop housing in those particular areas. So once we exclude some of these areas and once we also control for some agricultural land and other infrastructure, we end up with 3 categories, and most of that is cropland, and there is few bare ground and rangeland available in northern part of India, Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh region, and also mostly in Rajasthan and Gujarat. But again, the cropland is privately owned land, and if we exclude all the cropland, because cropland also has competing interest from food security and also for there's a possibility of agrivoltaic in cropland. So if we exclude all those cropland that has very high productivity, we end up with sort of limited land across India, and most of it is sort of fragmented. And we have large patches of land in our region, which is a little bit far away from the west of the country, but also being developed for solar. And then the other aspect of it, as Kaveri mentioned before, that where do these land or these patches available, right? So if you look at these 2 maps, one of them is, for example, tribal population in India or tribal ownership of land in India, and the left hand side is the percentage candidate project areas across these districts. So if you overlay or overlap these maps, then we will see that there is a large portion of candidate project areas in tribal areas as well. So the land governance in these tribal region is very different compared to other parts of India. So here the research question which we are trying to understand is how do we address sort of various governance aspects of land, and then should we also rethink cost and benefits to these particular contexts. But just again going back or taking a step back, we have been hearing this even in the yesterday's keynote. We heard that India would probably require 4 to 6% of land to develop RE projects so that we can achieve some level of cleaning the grid or net zero emissions. So I have a question: how much is 6% land in terms of states? How would it look like? Which state is closest to 6%? 7 crore. Yeah, it is Gujarat, as a matter of fact. Gujarat contributes to 5.9% of land mass. And now just think of the possibility you have to build an entire state of Gujarat or cover an entire state of Gujarat with, let's say, solar panels or wind plants to supply India's energy need by 2050 or 2070. And there is, I think, only a few states like UP and Maharashtra and Rajasthan are more than 6-7%. And of course, it's only on the energy side. There is a huge need for housing, agriculture, and all other aspects which are supported. So what we're trying to achieve is, I just move quickly from here, achieve some sort of contextual knowledge which will help energy modelers so that the modeling community becomes more sensitive to ground realities. We are trying to do this in 2 steps. One, we are contacting a lot of experts and interviewing them to understand a few things like how the community reacts to large scale PV or large scale renewable energy infrastructure, and do they have some kind of a preference in terms of technology, and how do they interact with both developers and governments and other entities like NGOs, CSOs and government officials. How do they fit in this process, and does the process sort of change across the state, which state prefers what and which community prefers what. So that's the higher level interviews that we are conducting, and we are also conducting or planning to conduct a large scale survey at the community level to understand their preferences for this. And we are happy to connect with all of you if you have any questions or any suggestions on this, and would love to chat. And we're hoping that this survey could inform a few important things for modeling and also for, in general, our infrastructure development in India, and which could be adopted in other countries as well. Especially on land governance and technology preference, but also on interaction with different entities and different kind of development mechanisms. Should we focus more on centralized, or are there any opportunities for decentralized and co-siting of agriculture and energy infrastructure, and what are the sort of biodiversity and natural resource considerations in citing these things, and what are the concerns. So as I mentioned before, the overall sort of vision is to develop not just a cost optimized or a cost based candidate project areas, but also bring in equity and justice perspective to identifying this. So I'll stop there, and please reach out to us if you have any questions, and happy to answer any questions.
Hi everyone, I'm Sukanya. I'm a PhD student at the School of Public Policy at I'll discuss some of the work that I have done for doing for my PhD thesis, which I've completed in the other green revolution. First was in agriculture, and we're possibly looking at another revolution in the green revolution in the electricity, energy sector, where I focused on equity and land governance issues. So the context of my study is large-scale solar parks in 2 states in India, Karnataka and Rajasthan. as some of these headlines suggest that the government is fairly, not just the central government, but state governments are also fairly ambitious about decarbonizing electricity systems. And one of the critical measures in doing that is building large-scale or utility-scale solar parks, which are referred to as ultra-mega solar parks. These projects refer to solar parks which are above a 500 megawatt capacity, and they usually occupy thousands of acres of land. While such projects are critical to achieving decarbonization targets, we also see, so yeah, there are some, this is basically the policy context, development of solar parks, solar parks. Many solar parks over the last decade have been commissioned under this policy. It was launched in 2014. While renewable energy is essential, it has also led to several conflicts across the globe, raising concerns about where to site RE projects. These issues are not limited to India, but are occurring globally. And these conflicts usually relate to adverse socio-economic consequences such as impacts on livelihoods, environmental harm such as biodiversity loss, or contestation over indigenous people's rights and land. This raises questions about who benefits from an energy transition and who loses out. And also, what is the process of citing such projects? What are the norms, what are the formal and informal rules that are followed? So, in my PhD thesis, I've reviewed a lot of literature, and these are some of the salient themes that have emerged. So, land tenure is a big aspect of energy transitions. As my colleague has also discussed, that these are land-intensive projects, and there is a land rush for developing all these solar parks. As Ganesh had shown that we may require approximately 6% of India's land mass to build these projects. So this calls attention to land tenure, basically the informal and formal rules governing access, control, and ownership of land. These issues are not restricted to any particular technology. They appear across hydrogen, solar, and wind, and across regions. Some of the issues that have been raised are around insecure land tenure faced by, say, historically marginalized groups such as agro-pastoral and landless groups. Weak recognition and protection of such customary land rights can cause conflicts and lower social acceptance of such RE projects. Within the global south context, the colonial systems of land governance also become important. Another theme that has emerged in literature is on energy justice. So, distributional justice basically talks about what is the allocation of benefits or burdens arising from any energy transition. Several scholars have documented loss of access to land and loss of livelihoods as a result of renewable energy projects, which they call energy dispossessions. While certain more powerful groups such as developers and governments are able to accrue benefits in the form of profits, it's not just certain groups or actors that benefit, but the scale at which these distributional benefits and burdens arise is also important. So, for instance, rural areas or areas neighboring renewable energy projects may feel that they shoulder more burdens than, say, the nation as a whole. So, since there are many distributive injustices that are arising out of the energy transition, it also becomes important to analyze whose voices are heard in the whole siting process and whose interests are protected or not protected in the process. So, it's important to conceptualize siting as a deliberative process where there are multiple actors involved, there are competing discourses, and there are negotiations. So, in literature, fair and inclusive planning processes have been found to be fundamental to the acceptance of energy projects. Scholars have also criticized this decide, announce and defend model, where a project is decided, it's announced, and when there is any kind of backlash, it's defended. Even if there are community engagement efforts, they might be considered tokenistic or suited to the needs of developers and governments, and not the needs of the community. In terms of who is recognized in the siting process, people with land ownership might be recognized more. So if you look at these two pictures, one could say that this is a wasteland, this is a barren land. But for people who are closely connected to these lands, it's important for their livelihood. They use it for grazing, they might be using it for agriculture. So any kind of stigma, place-related stigma associated with these lands could be used to gain access. So these are some of the research questions that I have pursued in my PhD thesis. How does land tenure impact socio-economic outcomes emerging from large-scale solar parks in Karnataka and Rajasthan? And how does deliberation in the siting process impact these distributed outcomes? So what are the pre-existing structures of governance and socio-economic inequalities that shape the process? Who is able to participate in the siting process? Who is not able to participate in the siting process? Have there been any consultative initiatives when a park is sited? These are my 3 case study sites. These are huge solar parks, that take anywhere between 10,000 to 14,000 acres of land. They're in gigawatt capacity, so to 1.5 to 2.2 gigawatts. I've used qualitative methods. I've interviewed diverse stakeholders, farmers from different caste groups, farmers with clear or unclear land titles, private solar park developers, panchayat members, people who don't have any land, and the parastatal agencies in these states that are responsible for developing these parks. So I basically draw a comparison between the Pakara solar park, which is primarily built on private agricultural land, and the Bhadla and the Fatehgarh solar park, which are primarily built on government land, with few parcels of private farmland also used to build Fatehgarh. This is some of the codings that I've done for the data that I have collected. In terms of findings, the socio-economic outcomes that I look at are the compensation that is given. So in the Pakara case, we see that since it's come up on private agricultural land, we see that people have secure land tenure and they have papers to show proof that they have ownership of land. And that they can leverage to get compensation. So there's a compensation decided for the land lease, 21,000 per acre per year. So for large landowners, that's a big benefit. It's a sort of like an additional income for them. But for medium to small landowners, while they're able to get some money, and they've been relieved of this burden of agriculture because it's a drought-prone area, it's a rain-fed area, and people were experiencing great difficulties in pursuing agriculture. They're able to get a stable source of income, but in my interviews, I also had people telling me that, this money is not enough. But for the landless people and agro-pastoral groups who are more reliant on commons, or even maybe other people's farms for grazing, this is a big loss of land. And they're not compensated for it because you get compensation only when for a piece of land that you own. So in Bhadla and Fatehgarh solar parks, where a lot of these solar parks have come up on government land, the picture is a little more fuzzy in terms of usage of that land. Because while on paper it's government land, there are local communities there who are using these lands, and they've been using it for several decades, for agriculture and using it as farms. People who've been able to show some kind of ownership of that land, they're able to leverage that to get some compensation. However, all those with any kind of unclear land titles or non-recognition of customary tenure, they lose out. There are also some additional costs in the Bhatla and Fatehgarh region because local communities there use some of those commons for firewood. So some of the women told me that now they have to buy it, they have to buy gas. People are also engaged in legal cases against those solar parks, and there's an additional cost of legal fees. Again, so these solar parks are projected as like development projects. They'll bring in jobs and those areas will prosper. But receiving a job hinges on land. Right? So if you're able to say that okay, I lease land, I can get a job. But again, those who lose out in this process are the landless groups. Again, the nature of that job is just like temporary jobs. They're not like formal technical jobs. There are people like in Bhavla said that we don't have the requisite qualifications for it, so we didn't get those jobs. But in Bhatla and Fatehgarh, since most of the people didn't have any land to leverage to say that okay, we've given you something, we want something in return, there was no assurance of jobs to local communities. So, the other aspect of my work is on trying to understand what is the whole process of setting up the solar parks. So the main agencies involved are these parastatal agencies like Rajasthan Renewable Energy Corporation Limited in Rajasthan, or CREDL, Karnataka Renewable Energy Development Limited in Karnataka. Sorry, I think I switched up the anyway, so in Pagara, so there was like there were efforts for consensus building. There was a land pooling process which began with submitting like an expression of interest in the newspaper. There were some consent letters given by willing farmers who wanted to lease the land. The energy minister had also gone to that area to try and get support of the local people, tell them about the project, and get some consensus that okay, we're going to build something here and it's going to benefit you. But on the other hand, in Bhatla and Fatehgarh, there was no such process. It was a matter of converting the land from government for a solar park. In Bhavla, the people that I had spoken with, people I had interviewed, they claimed to have the land lease documents, but it's a very technical document. Even if it's in Kannada or even if it's in English, it's not possible to understand. They weren't entirely aware of the exact contents. They knew that they're going to get fees, a certain lease amount for a certain period of time, but anything beyond that, they weren't aware of it. But in Bhatla and Fatehgarh, again, there was no information given about the upcoming solar park. And over there, middlemen play a great role in trying to aggregate all that land. So farmers report coercion, lies or exaggeration by middlemen, and they have wherever private land has been leased, over there also people are unaware of the lease document. But in both the cases, we can see that landless and agro-pastoral groups out in the process, and they don't really have a say in the process of setting because it's entirely hinged on people leasing out land to solar parks. There are also several instances of protests in Bhatla, in that region. There's a team ORAD which is trying to get these ORADs formally documented. Some of my concluding reflections are that if we're trying to balance the energy transition with development, we probably need to rethink compensation mechanisms. And one of those ways could be that even the landless and agro-pastoral groups need to be compensated. Or we could consider maybe shareholding in the companies that are formed for building these solar parks. We can also think about redesigning the built infrastructure. Is it really necessary to cordon off that whole area? Can't we maybe access can be allowed for grazing, or even pursuing agriculture, giving attention agrivoltaics. These projects are exempted from any kind of impact assessment, so that should be brought back, and impact assessment should just be done by some consulting firm, but perhaps also with the involvement of community. And we already have constitutional provisions. So for instance, the 11th schedule, so the role, panchayats are completely absent from this process. All they have to do is give an NOC. So for a more decentralized governance of the energy transition, panchayats will be thought of as a space where these deliberations are. Thank you.
Before we invite Mr. Ganesh Bhatt, I was wondering if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. There were 10 solutions that I didn't hear, which we are using in Europe. So one, of course, is windmills in the sea, and then we don't need land. What the Chinese are doing is putting the deserts full of windmills. The whole Xinjiang province is full of windmills. And what we do now in the Netherlands is floating solar parks, which also doesn't require any land. Then a new trend is the elevating panels. So that would allow you farmers to graze underneath. A fourth solution is to look at crops that need shadow, like coffee and cacao, which you could grow underneath these panels. Then there's a lot of activities of putting solar panels on the roofs, and here farms, factories, housing complexes, they help you a lot. Then we're doing a lot along the roadsides. You excluded the airports, but as you know, the landing strip is always in the middle of a green flat area, which could also be used for solar panels. So you can cover all kinds of infrastructure, rivers, canals, roads, tunnels. Then we now have glass that generates electricity. So basically you put into the building glass. It seems to be low production. Not possible. Then of course there is a lot of use of less fertile land, marginal land. You have the choice either adding it to nature or using it for energy. So I think there are a number of possibilities which were not included in your calculation. Thank you.
Thank you. They are very important potential technical solutions we should consider, certainly. But of course, the institutional and policy mechanisms which or even economic considerations, are they viable and all of that, we still have to think about. Yeah, we'll just take one more question and then move on to the next one.
Technically, if technically, if I missed that part, I'm not sure, but during analysis, it's very important to see like which are the very important factors that you are giving weightage. So like there are a lot of, I think you have applied that or not to come up with the, the potential suitable areas for this thing. So like ASP, which is those methods, where you can give the weightage to the criteria, and also to while selecting those criteria and giving weightage, is very important to have literature review as mentioned, like what are the areas that has been given potential importance while having this type of entire structures. So my question is, have you seen that part or not?
Yeah, the quick clarification is this is not a selection yet. This is all available. When we do a priority on, let's say this land is more prioritized over the other one, then we apply either AHP, or there are also conjoint or even cost-based weights that we can apply. So we haven't applied any weights yet. And just to get back to you, all the other technologies that you, so the things that I talked on right now is only grid utility scale, which are larger plants, both solar and wind. And yes, India is experimenting on offshore. There are a couple of pilot projects that have taken place, but the issue is on the western coast, the sites are not suitable, but on the eastern coast it's more suitable. VIPV, or the building integrated PV, and rooftops on the even I think there was a pilot on putting micro wind panels on train. So even that was tried out, but the scale that we are talking about here is close to 4 terawatt, and to do something at the scale of 4 terawatt, we need a massive build out. But everything bigger, or all hands on deck, is kind of being tried out wherever possible in India also. The exclusion with respect to highways and airports are because of security reasons, and it's the sort of government regulation that doesn't allow. But then the Kochi airport is 100% sort of solar airport, so they have built rooftop solar in Kochi.
Come back to you.
Thank you, Professor Kadir, for giving me the floor. I also thank you very much for your insightful opening, and also the research carried out by Ganesh. I am also Ganesh. It's so nice to meet you, Ganesh. Here. We have two Ganesh, you Ganesh, and also Sukanyaji for your intensive research on this area. So, to begin with, let me just compare Nepal and India. I am from Nepal and I work for the Ministry of Land. And I'm not an expert on these energy issues and also climate change issues, but I am a land professional, and so I will comment on the land perspective. So I was just googling out. So by area, India is almost 22 or 3 times bigger than Nepal. By population, almost maybe 46, 47 times bigger. We are only 3 billion, and you are talking about 1.4 billion. So you are currently building 40 gigawatt solar parks, and we are thinking of only 1 gigawatt. So still maybe in many places around the country. So our land requirement for solar park is 1 hectare per megawatt. 1 hectare per megawatt means almost similar to what I was just looking at. And regarding carbon emission, we are at the 95th place, and our per capita emission is 161 grams. So we are there. So I was looking, I was listening you with the land perspective, how challenges you are facing with land acquisition. And basically, we have three sort of, major land tenure situation. We have the typology of the tenure, how we have recently are defining that: formal, non-formal, and informal. Formal, having land titles. Non-formal, they are eligible to have land title but have not issued yet. You will have other evidences in the past, but the government is still in the process of entitling those kind of lands, and they're informal. So you are occupying some state land, government land, something like that, and some forest land. So in recent years, in some of the project activities, the government has decided also to compensate the construction that has been made in informal settlement itself. So we do not have any generic law for that. So the government does so on project basis. So that's why, so while you are talking about the compensation, so we have faced many challenges. So you do have certain legal provision for farming, yes. You have certain registration, the valuation for registration purpose, and so they will simply multiply that value. But for non-formal, you are eligible to have title, but you are not at in title. So how do you compensate those sort of land? That's one. How do you really compute the value of compensation for the informal sectors? And also there may be some squatters. And in recent years also we are facing the problem that if any project has to resettle whole of the settlement within the project area, then the population will not only expect the amount of land that he or she holds, but also its informal tenure with land natural resources. They will need forest, they will need grazing land, pasture land, they will need crematorium areas, they will need some open spaces, something like that. And so one of the hydraulic power project that is being funded by ADB is greatly facing the land acquisition in one of the hydropower project in the country. And similarly, you also have to think about how I was listening in the previous session that you have most of the land in northeast India, you are practicing the customary land tenure. So how do you, because you have rightly mentioned about we have to respect the social acceptance. So how you will address the social aspiration of those customary. The sentiment with the land is so touchy that you will try your best not to leave them. So I belong to the far western part of the country, and I live in Kathmandu for almost 3 decades. So I have not, I still have my sentimental touch with the place where I born. I don't want to lose that part of my land, and so only the benefits. So since I do have better benefits in Kathmandu, and so I am, even if I do have some sentimental touch, I seldom go there to use that. So unless you create better opportunities for the people whose land you will be acquiring, it will be already there will be resistance for you to acquire such kind of land, and so we are facing many of such challenges in the country. Big hydraulic power projects, very close to Kathmandu itself, we are facing the challenges because the way how we have calculated the compensation value, so the people expect that at least the value that they are given should at least maintain their minimum livelihood that they are currently possessing. And so, but their expectation will be very high. So these are some of the challenges that we may face in the future while whenever we are dealing with the land issue. So I would also maybe in your research I was looking how did you have any research on how to incentivize the same. I don't want to leave my home. I'm in place. So how will you incentivize them to make them agree that you are living from that particular location? Because once you have mentioned one sentence, so for pastoral community you said sort of livestock. So they have their own way of life. So if they sell their livelihood, then how will they sustain their lives, further? So I think we also need, like you are a researcher, so we also need to think of how we can make the changes on the pattern of their livelihood. So what sort of incentives we can provide? So these may take a long period of time to get them used to with the new way of life. So these are some of the issues that we are also currently facing. So I was as in the beginning I said I will be looking at the gaps of challenges with India and Nepal. So most of the the challenges that you are facing are similar to Nepal, but only the thing that we have lesser number of tenure system compared to India. So you might have several challenges depending upon the nature of the thing. And basically the way of making people change their way of living, that is the most important thing. Because we have some areas, if you allocate land to the southern plain, everyone will be happy. Because they have better opportunities, the land is quite fertile. Only the availability of land could be questioned. And so only the government organizations like we might have some problem on how much land should be allocated for this much amount of land. But for you may be further research on how to address these kind of challenges. That's what from your presentation, and that's what I could understand from you, and I would figure out where are the gaps and the challenges. So that's why I want to say, I think I don't have much to say about your insightful presentation, and I thank you very much for this presentation, because it will certainly be useful for us to know how India is dealing with, because we share all the sentiments, also the similar sentiments across this Bharat. So this will be quite learning from us as well, and I wish good luck to the research, and I wish that we may further collaborate on how you can also learn from Nepal. So if you wish to have any Nepal case study from Nepal, then please join us, and we'll for sure collaborate. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ganesh. I really appreciated your sincere efforts to engage with local communities and compensate them fairly. I think we have, as you said, we have a lot to learn from each other. Thank you for your kind words about our research. Any questions for us? Yeah.
Two questions. The first one for Sukanya. I was just curious to understand if your research is also looking at I'm assuming there are some private players involved in both the parts. I'm not familiar with the part. But I'm curious to see how that contracting with the government took place in some of the sort of processes that emerged there. And as a second part of the question, I'm also curious about some of the terms of leasing that was offered to the communities. Like how permanent are these? Usually I think like 99 years or like 50 years or something along those lines that are extremely long term. So I'm just curious to see how the community sort of decided on those terms as well. My question for Ganesh, as someone who does not work in the renewable space, but is familiar with sort of the policy in India for rooftop solar. I'm curious to see if that data point would also sort of add to your sort of stack that you're doing, and if it's a challenge to really sort of come across those data points, because I don't think there's much data available on sort of the adoption of rooftop solar, and I don't know the complexities of even sort of establishing that data. So yeah, just these two questions.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks for your question. So basically, in these parts, what the government has done is that it's acquired a piece of land, and then there's a bidding process where developers can bid for it, whoever gets the piece, and they get certain parcels of land within the park, and they would correspond to a certain wattage. So the whole park might be for 2.2 gigawatt or whatever, but there would be parcels of land where some of these private solar developers are generating their power. Apart from the second point about lease, so lease, they aren't for that long because the life of a panel is about 30 years. So you find these agreements for about 28 to 30 years. Communities don't get any say as such because it's sold like, you're going to get this much money for so long, and many of these areas are rainfed areas, so agriculture practicing that is very unpredictable. So broadly, these are the two terms that are communicated to the
Thanks for the questions. I think rooftop is a really interesting case in India for a few reasons, and there is some data available, and we are actually working on that. And also interestingly, this is the second rooftop boom that's happening in India. Like the previous one, there was like I think 20 gigawatt of rooftop plan was there, but I think we ended up installing something like 3 gigawatt in the last 10 years or so. Right now we have a really interesting policy which gives a lot of capital subsidy to about 20 million households for the next few years. But it has two interesting things. One, the roofs are, Indian households have either very small roof, and some households don't have a very flat roof and fully possible to construct. But there have been a lot of rooftop installation happening in the last 2 to 3 years, especially in urban part of India. And I think that a few states also have mandatory installation on government buildings, which is I think more interesting things to do. And the other part of this is the economic aspect, which means those who can afford rooftop solar are going to get away from paying bills to discoms, and the discoms or distribution companies or utilities, they are under serious economic pressure, and they can't afford to lose paying customers with rooftop. So there is some kind of a bottleneck there, but I think there are policy innovations and mechanisms are being worked on.
Why don't you go first? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. My few comments or wanting to know more about the compensation that has been given to the landowners or the community. What is the criteria that has been used for giving them compensation? Whether it's just the area that has been taken into consideration, or the land use, or other parameters that are being considered. Maybe if we talk about Northeast, in terms of biodiversity, I think there's somebody that you have mentioned, whether those valuable things have been considered in terms of whether to give compensation or not. That's one question that I would like to put forward.
In Pagoda, as far as I understand, it's only land ownership. If you can prove that you have ownership of the land and you have, records to prove that, and that's the only criteria that they've used in Pampara. But all of the things you mentioned are, food for thought. Why can't we use land usage as a consideration so that they are allowed access? Or, ecological value or cultural value, all of those things are very important. And in Germany, there are places where, people who live, they don't need to own the land, but if they live within a certain radius of the solar park, they were all given a shareholding in the company. But again, how do you decide the value of that shareholding? All of that is still things that need to be figured out.
So the question is for you. In the tool that you are creating, right, there are existing tools very similar to yours. There is a site drive, right? And some that you transmission part is something that you're adding. But I wanted to understand from you that what you plan to do with the tool that you're creating. Say you identify sites, what then? Are you planning to give this to government, stakeholders? Just curious about that.
Yes, I am. We are following very similar methodology as SiteRight, but the addition to that are two things. One, updating sort of base data set. I think SiteRight mostly uses, most of the data that is used in the SiteRight are sort of 2011 census and henceforth. We are updating it to the recent one, just as a tool in itself. But further, we are using this data and capacity to sort of optimize for planning for 2050 and 2070 and hopefully every year from 2030 onwards, which is going to give some insights on what is the build rate that is going to be expected for the next 2 decades and where do you plan for that, and what are the issues on the supply side and supply chain issues. And also in the downscaling process, we're thinking to do the implications on employment, the implications on, let's say, land use and other sectors in the district or if possible sub-district. So that's the overall idea. It's the tool. The objective was not to build the tool in itself. This is sort of a co-product which emerged.
The idea is if I could add to that, the idea is to understand where are the trade-offs really from a national point of view. If this data allows us to plan our build-out in some ways and understand what challenges might emerge in different parts of the country with regard to a build-out like that. So when we have, let's say, for example, there's a lot of uncertainty about which technologies will become viable, right? We don't know if CCUS will become viable by 2050. We don't know how viable hydrogen will be by 2050. In case those technologies aren't so viable as we hope, then we will need a lot more land, or we'll need to explore other opportunities like wind, offshore, and so on, right? What is that range like? What is the range of uncertainty there? How much land do we need under different conditions, right? And how can we plan for that from a policy perspective, from a development perspective? What sort of social challenges may we expect in terms of job shifts, right? So that's the broader idea of the study. It's not just to produce this tool which helps a stakeholder today, but to get a 50-year forward projection to the extent we can. Someone there had a question? Yeah, the last question, and then we can close the session because I think we're already past time.
Thanks so much for your Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm from Kenya. And basically, my concern here is this is a very interesting study, but I'm trying to find out what's the space of the community in terms of this project. How are they going to benefit? when you are coming up with panel, this power goes to, and what about the communities who are around them? Big panels, but the power may end up serving people in urban areas. Thank you.
Yeah, I think India had its own share of mini-grid revolution in the last decade, where there was no grid in most rural areas. But now I think almost 95+% of villages have grid connection. The reliability is still a question. And there are some mini-grid still being operated in central part of India and also northeast. But most part of India today has a grid connection. And of course, mini-grid has been having really useful technology and still continues.
All right. So with that, we'd like to thank you all for your presence and for your very thought-provoking questions. Let's move to the next session. Thank you. Okay, start.